assume that they will marshal their own strength legislatively to pass this free trade agreement or not. And two, I would contest him on the ground level, because I'd say, look, if you grant the negative team the right to fiat the object, then there's no limitation. There's no bright line that limits where their object fiat begins and where their object fiat ends. And as a result, reject his counterplan on the grounds that it leaves AF with very little ground and makes debating on affirmative completely unpredictable. Because there's no way, as the affirmative team, I can walk into the round and know the infinite number of ways that neg could possibly fiat the object in the resolution. But yeah, we could have a fun debate over that issue. Yes, what's your name? Chris.
Second question, hopefully we'll get back to perms. So when you're talking about perms, my understanding of permutation is that you're not actually changing the case.
That's one view of permutation. That's non-advocacy perm.
Okay, so that permutation is simply almost like a demonstration, like, hey, look, this was our...
Yes, we'll talk about that in a minute. Other questions, ladies? No, I'm sorry. That's not at all what I meant to say. You can use any reasonable actor that you'd like. What you can't do is use the affirmative actor and another actor at the same time.
Okay, so in terms of the unilateral...
And when I say can't, I mean can't as in I recommend strongly against it. And if you do it, you'll probably lose. Not there is a cosmic law of the debate universe that you are violating.
Going off of the whole bilateral, unilateral, what she just said, though, what if the negative team just ran it as an implied counterplan or a non-topical counterplan? Couldn't they still just say...
Well, they could totally do it as an implied counterplan. Yes. Yes. Yeah, in that scenario, that's probably where an implied counterplan would be fantastic. Any other questions from this side of the room, or have I put you all to sleep? All right, good. Smiles and nods. Yeah.
Basically, going back to the permutation, the advocacy permutation, does that basically just mean, like, for the affirmative, they suck up the negative case?
Yes. Advocacy perm, the reason you want to do this, if you decide to do it, is you get to steal the advantages of the negative counterplan. And at the end of the round, you're like, Judge, weigh the advantages of our case and the negative counterplan versus whatever the negative has left on the table, which probably won't be much if you successfully permed their counterplan. All right, any other questions on advocacy perms, or can I move on? Moving on. Non-advocacy perms. This is what we were talking about just a moment ago. A non-advocacy perm says, all we want to do as the affirmative team in today's debate round is test the negative team's competitiveness. And if their counterplan is not competitive, it should lose. So here you say, look, our plan to create a national sales tax and the affirmative team's counterplan to abolish the death tax, these two things can be done at the same time. We're not advocating passing their case. We don't claim to pass their case. We're not modifying our case to pass their case. We're just saying both can be done at the same time. Therefore, reject their plan. They don't have a compelling disadvantage that abrogates our case. On net benefits, our case is better than their case. They haven't done their job and proven that their counterplan is counter to ours, to our case. Any questions on that? Generally speaking, in homeschool debate, whether it's in STOA or in CFCA, this is the counterplan permutation that you want to use, non-advocacy. And I'll explain why a little bit later. Using advocacy perms can be awesome because it lets you steal the counterplan's advantages, but it also has some major strategic implications that you might not be willing to accept. Any questions on this? Great. The last two types of permutation are severance and intrinsics. These are very, very controversial, but you should know about them anyway. In a severance permutation, what the affirmative team does is they say, look, we'll do part of our plan and part of the counterplan. Mesh them together, and then claim the advantages of both. So this allows the affirmative team to essentially axe part of their case that the negative counterplan disadvantage links to. So say the affirmative runs a case to build a border fence on the southern border. And the negative team runs a counterplan to tear down the existing border fence because it blocks a critical valley that the spined toad has to cross in its mating pattern. And if this piece of the border fence isn't torn down, this horned toad is going to die off, and biodiversity is going to be decreased and impact out ad infinitum. You know the drill. If the affirmative team gets up and says, let's do our case, and let's do the negative counterplan, but only the part where they tear down the border fence along this one valley. In that case, they're doing a severance perm, where they're cutting their own case to make it more compatible with the counterplan. You tracking with that? In an effort to absorb it. And that's not the best example, but I think it gets the point across. It's where you modify your own case. That's questioned on theoretical grounds because should the affirmative team really be able to amend their case to get out of disadvantages? Probably not.
Not just the fact that it would be amending the case, but wouldn't it make the affirmative team look kind of weak because we're supposed to die by our plan, so when we're severing part of our plan.
Yes, there's also that problem. It's basically getting up in the middle of the round and admitting, yeah, sorry, we didn't think this through very well, didn't put it together quite as well as we hoped, so just take mandate 4 and run with it.
Well, basically, by the time that you decide that you want to sever part of your plan, you've already spent a significant amount of time on that part of the plan.
Yes.
And it would lose your team credibility because you're saying, okay, well, we were wrong about this part of our plan.
And severing that part of your plan may also cost you some of your advantages. So it can get into a really dicey situation very quickly. Yeah.
This is why I sometimes think it's unfair for the app to change their case because it makes it look whiny and like they want to hide from all the problems.
That's a great point. Amending your case in the round, it's completely legal, but it's almost always a terrible idea. Any other questions on severance perms? Maddie? Are there any times a severance perm is justified? I've never run a severance perm because I structure my cases pretty well. But if you are on the ropes and the negative is about to destroy you with a counterplan, and you can sever a mandate and decouple their major disadvantage that makes their counterplan competitive, then it might be worth it.
Is there ever a time where you can sever part of their plan when you perm it?
You mean partially perm a counterplan? Yeah, I would say you can do that. Yeah, that's not going to get you into major theoretical trouble. Back in the 70s, that might have been a big deal, but not so much anymore. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm very confused. How does whole resolution and severance link?
Because whole resolution, you don't have one plan to stick to. You just are able to propose various solutions that might work. And so, because the app's only duty is to uphold the resolution, they don't have to uphold any plan, they just have to uphold the resolution in general. So as long as we're just upholding the resolution in general, isn't it okay to change your...
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I think you're operating under a slight misunderstanding of whole res theory. If I get up as the affirmative team and I advocate a whole resolution, I'm endorsing all possible changes under the resolution. So I'm not changing. I have a remarkably consistently bad advocacy. All right. Any other questions under that? Great. Let's talk about intrinsic permutations. These are my personal favorite, though most people absolutely abhor them. An intrinsic permutation is where you have the AF plan and you take the negative counterplan and then you add a third component that is neither the AF plan or the counterplan, and you use that third component to link out of a major disadvantage that makes your case non-competitive. All right, absolutely crazy. Don't do this. It's really fun when you do, but it just blows the flow up. It makes everything very confusing. And obviously, there's some major theoretical objections. I mean, where does this new part of the plan even come from? It just drops onto the flow like a Martian.
Do you have a basic example?
Do I have a good example? Not where I've done this with a counterplan. There are some examples, but they're just incredibly questionable. the way I used intrinsics in high school and kind of really baffled some of my opponents in a very humorous manner was I would use intrinsic permutations to beat disadvantages. And this is some old theory that's kind of making a little bit of a renaissance in certain non-homeschool leagues. Let's say I got up and they ran a spending disadvantage on me. And my first line refutation would be non-unique. We're already $17 trillion in debt. Are you really going to say my $7 billion plan is going to tip us over? So I run no brink, etc. But they'd press on and, build their entire 1NC into this massive disadvantage. So in the 2AC, we'd get up and we'd say, look, in real life, when Congress is making policy, bills go through an amendment process. Look at the affirmative team's disadvantage. Their disadvantage is a generic disadvantage that links to pretty much every possible plan that spends money. Are there ways Congress could pass our plan, gain our advantages, and also avoid the disadvantage? The answer is absolutely. They would take the money needed from another area, or they would reduce spending. So, Judge, reject this disadvantage on the grounds that there are ways for Congress to pass our plan and reap our benefits without linking into this disadvantage. So what we were doing there is we were running an implied intrinsic permutation where we said, look, based on a reality standard, this is not a reason to reject our case. And then negatives would have to come back and they'd attack us on ground, generally speaking, and say that's totally not fair for you to delink our disadvantage by amending your case midway through, even if you don't explicitly say we're adding mandate 3, cut the funds from somewhere else.